Yeah.
Great. I'm Lori Ward, everyone. I'm CEO at Washington's National Park Fund. Thanks for joining us today. This is our 20th virtual field trip, and it just feels kind of like a 20th anniversary. We have gotten so much positive feedback from people across the country and actually around the world for these programs. And it's such a privilege and treat for us to share them with you and to bring our national parks right into your homes and your offices if you're in an office. And so thank you for being here with us today. As I said, I'm CEO of Washington's National Park Fund. We're actually having a very good year financially, and it's thanks to the thousands of individual donors who continue to step up, donors, foundations, corporations. So we're happy about that. And we're run by a staff of 7 strong and smart women. And we have a board of 22 individuals who work hard, giving of their time, talents, and treasures, very active. We work closely with the 3 superintendents as well as park leadership in North Cascades, Mount Rainier, and Olympic National Parks. They help us to bring these programs to you each week. I'm excited about today. I love the North Cascades. Who doesn't if you've been there? And I love birds and I love owls. Chris and I were just talking about it, but when I've been in areas or been out camping and I hear owls in the middle of the night, there's something about that. So we're gonna learn a lot about all kinds of birds up at North Cascades National Park. And with that, I wanna say to you, are your packs ready? Is your lunch ready to go? Do you have your water bottle, your sunscreen? Let's jump on the bus and head on up to North Cascades. Chris Williams, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. Chris grew up in the San Francisco area. I'm sure, you know, lots of smoke down there. He first came to the North Cascades as a lucky graduate student. He was studying environmental education through the great university, Western Washington University. And he was an intern with the park last summer. And this summer he's become an interpretive ranger. He's one of those lucky guys that gets to do something that he loves so much. Before coming to the North Cascades, Chris studied zoology and worked with marine mammals and ornithology. I love that word, ornithology. In his free time, he enjoys none other than birding. He enjoys hiking, backpacking, kayaking, and lots of other activities. So with that, I say to you, Chris, thanks for being with us today, and go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, welcome to this program, Birds of the North Cascades. Let's see, here we are. So yeah, as I said before, or as Lori just said, I'm really into birds. They're one of my favorite groups of animals to observe, as I love all animals, but birds are just really cool because you can always see them out in the wild. Before we jump into the presentation, I have a couple images here on the screen. I know Lori talked about owls before. You can see in this this lower picture here, is actually a photo I snapped from just right outside of our visitor center. You know, we've had outdoor operations all year because we weren't able to open the visitor center. And I actually snapped this photo of a family of northern saw-whet owl fledglings. It's the first time I've ever seen those types of owls before, so that was a really cool sighting. Above that is another one of our most common birds that we'll see around the visitor center in the summertime is cedar waxwing. Really great fruit-eating bird. So we can jump in. Next slide. So the North Cascades National Park is a very biodiverse national park, and it has all types of habitats within the park. We have the riparian zone, which is, you know, the zone that's kind of like a disturbed zone. It's by, you know, usually by bodies of water. You get a lot of deciduous trees down there. Temperate rainforests, the alpine zone way up in the mountains, and we also have parts of the park that are on the eastern side of the Cascades too, down near Lake Chelan. So you have all of these different habitats, which change as you move up in elevation and from one side of the mountains to the other, which makes the bird diversity really spectacular here. So we can move on. So I have a question for all of you all. I'm just curious about how many of you have actually visited the North Cascades. So I'll let you all answer this question. There's a poll that just showed up on the screen. You can answer that. And we'll see what people say.
Sharon, I'm not seeing the poll. I'm not sure it's popped up yet.
Don't know. Let's see. All right. So from the results, I can see that 71% of the people that responded have been to the national park, which is pretty cool. It's a great place. If you haven't been, I'd really recommend it. There is something for everybody. Easy trails, really long, grueling trails, lots of birds, lots of plants, lots of things for all people. Really great place. So we can move on to the next slide. So part of what makes a park so special is this thing that's known as the rain shadow effect. Now with the rain shadow effect, we get a lot of moisture that's coming off the ocean, which, you know, as it rises, it turns into precipitation, which is why, you know, typically, stereotype of Washington is a very wet place, really moist place, which is accompanied by those really big conifers, you know, like Douglas fir, western red cedar that we see a lot of on the western side. But as those clouds move up in elevation, a lot of them cannot make it over the mountain range. And so like as you go east in the Cascades, it eventually gets drier. And so if you've ever been to like Spokane or even just east of the park over in the Winthrop area, it's very dry. And it's very drastic and really neat to actually see all of these changes. And not that far of a drive, if you really think about it. So it's a rain shadow effect. And I have a question that I want you all to respond to in the chat box. We're going to start talking about some of the birds that we can find here in the park. But I'm curious about, you know, what's your favorite bird? So please take time to respond in the chat box. And when you respond, please respond to all panelists and attendees. And I'll see what people say. It does not have to be a bird that is from this area. Let's see what people are saying. We're getting a lot of responses. Wow. Cardinals, cool, great East Coast bird. Every time I go over to the East Coast, I'm just blown away by cardinals. I know they're a super common bird out there. We don't have them out here. Hummingbirds, lots of, you know, hummingbirds are a great bird. Varied thrush, that is a great answer. In my opinion, that should be the state bird of Washington. Nothing against the goldfinch, but it's kind of my typical Northwest bird I think of normally. Osprey, another great bird, also known as the Seahawk for you football people. Short-eared owl. Hi Kim. Actually, I think a couple of years ago we went birding out in Skagit and we saw some short-eared owls. We'll do a couple more. See, my sister responded, Jill. She really likes chickadees. Wilson's warbler. I've never seen one of those, and I'll do one more. Let's see. Actually, I've seen a Wilson's warbler. What am I talking about? And harpy eagle. That's a great bird. That's a Central and South American bird. They really like to eat sloths. So that'd be a bird I'd love to see. Thank you for responding. So bird diversity in the North Cascades. So there's a lot of birds that have been known to inhabit the park. I'll talk about just how many in a second. But a lot of them, you know, are migratory. So right now, we still have the possibility to see a lot of, you know, see some warblers, see some things like that in the wintertime, in the early spring are not here. So some are resident, you know, we'll get, you know, chickadees, varied thrushes, things like that are resident. I'll talk about some of the resident birds in a second. But birds such as the rufous hummingbird, which is here on the screen, migrates from as far away as Central America each year. In fact, the rufous hummingbird has one of the longest migrations of any bird in North America. It goes as far south as Costa Rica and will go as far north as Alaska, which is a really, really long migration. The nighthawk, which is also one of my favorite birds, I look forward to their return each year. They'll migrate as far south as like Argentina, and they'll come all the way back up in the summertime. They're really fun to watch. Really, really cool birds. And then many of the birds that we'll find in the park, you'll only find in certain parts of the park. You won't find in you won't find certain birds in certain parts of the park, and I'll talk about that next slide. But a quick poll: how many birds do you all think inhabit the park? Should be a poll that pops up, so you can take some time to answer that, and we'll see what people come up with. Yeah, it's lots of options here. We'll see. Yeah, and I'll share the answer once we get some results. Yeah, 150 to 199. Good guess. Good guess. We'll see. All right, so it looks like 45% said 200 to 250, 29% said 150 to 199, 23% said 100 to 149, and 3% said 50 to 99. So the last answer is correct. There are 217 species of birds that have actually been recorded in the park. Now some of those might have just been recorded like once or twice. But those are all of the birds that are like possible to be seen in the park. So that's pretty cool. We get all of these birds, and many of which, as I said earlier, are only coming through during a certain part of the year. So you get birds that have seen so much of the world that come through each year. Get to the next slide. So the western slopes of the Cascades receive a lot more precipitation than the eastern slopes do, as I previously said. So this is kind of like what we think of when we think of like typical Washington. Sorry, East Siders. A lot of people think of Washington very wet and very rainy, which is true. This side of the Cascades during certain months, during the wettest months, can get up to like 100 inches of rain. And it's a lot of rain, and the forests out here are characterized by very big stands of coniferous forests, oftentimes filled up with trees such as Douglas fir and western hemlock and western red cedar. In the lowlands, as you move up in elevation on the west side, you'll get different species as well. But those are your typical lowland temperate rainforest tree species. And there's a lot of birds that you can find in this portion of the Cascades, as we'll see. So one of the birds that's very typical of this side is the Pacific wren. Now, during the springtime and early summer, you can hear these birds with their very, very long, high-pitched song. It goes on for a really long time. But they're typical birds that will hang out on the forest floor. They'll hop around looking for insects. They're only a few inches long, but their song fills up the forest a lot. And so they're very good west side bird that you can oftentimes see if you hang around dense forests on the Pacific wren. So the red-breasted sapsucker, they are very cute. They are very cute. The red-breasted sapsucker is one of, I believe, about 5 woodpecker species that we can see on the lower west side, western slopes of the Cascades. And what's cool about sapsuckers is like, unlike other woodpeckers, they actually make tiny circular holes in trees that will sometimes like go all the way around the tree. And so a good way to tell that that a sapsucker's been out of the tree is if you find a whole bunch of like tiny circular little holes it's a good indication that a sapsucker is there. And that's true with, you know, sapsuckers around the country. But red-breasted sapsuckers are probably, you know, in my opinion, the prettiest, you know, of our woodpeckers, and are actually going after insects that get caught in the sap. And they're very common to see around the western side of the mountains. So yeah, it's red-breasted sapsucker. And then, you know, this, you know, this bird, the Steller's jay, you all might see a lot of, you know, if you're in Western Washington. It is, you know, it is definitely one of the more common birds that we'll have around the visitor center. If you're around the visitor center for like more than 2 minutes, you'll see one of these hopping around. But Steller's jays are really cool. What's really interesting about them, they can imitate the calls of red-tailed hawks, which is really neat. So sometimes you'll hear a call that sounds like a red-tailed hawk call, but it'll sound kind of weird. It'll sound like a red-tailed hawk that's not really like a red-tailed hawk, and it might be one of these, and they'll do that to scare, they believe to scare birds off of their nests and get them kind of afraid so they can go and steal eggs or take offsprings, or Steller's jays attack your dog. Oh man, I wouldn't put it past them. They can be kind of, you know, they can be kind of fierce sometimes. You gotta be aware of those corvids. So yeah, that's a Steller's jay. It's a jay that's blue, but it's not a blue jay. We do not have blue jays on this side of the country. So we'll move. So the alpine zone. So as you move up and up in elevation, it becomes a lot harder for plants to survive. There are plants that live high up in the mountains, but it's really hard because you know, the environment becomes a lot harsher. There's a lot of snow that covers the alpine from, you know, for a lot of the year, and it's very harsh. You know, a lot of winds, very cold temperatures. Not a lot. I mean, there's not a lot that can survive here. But you know, there are birds that do make a living out of living high up in these elevations. That right there in that picture, that is the picture of Mount Baker from the Ptarmigan Traverse Trail, I believe. So yeah, alpine zone. And but up in these elevations, you can still find birds such as the great-crowned rosy finch. The great-crowned rosy finch, you know, is a really cool bird that likes to hang around snowfields. They'll actually go around, they'll eat ice worms. They're these birds that, you know, I mean, there's these worms that kind of like live in snow, and these birds will fly around eating them. And I actually think I saw one of these for the first time last weekend. I was up in the Copper Ridge area, and I saw a tiny bird hopping around the snow. I was like, oh, that's probably a rosy finch. So yeah, they're a cool high elevation bird, really pretty looking. You also get birds like the white-tailed ptarmigan. And the white-tailed ptarmigan, what's really cool about them is just kind of like, you know, snowshoe hare, or an Arctic fox. They will actually change their color during the winter time. They'll actually turn all white. I mean, I've heard from friends, like if you're out like skiing or hiking in the snow, they'll sometimes pop up and fly away if you spook them. Kind of in the same way that a grouse does. We have a lot of grouse in our area. But yeah, that's a good high altitude bird. So over on the eastern slopes of the Cascades, gets a lot drier, can be a lot hot, it'll be a lot of times a lot hotter over there than it is on the western slopes. Good trees for this side of our ponderosa pines, really beautiful, really tall trees. A lot of shrublands, a lot of shrub steppe habitat over here. Very different, kind of desert-like depending on where you are. You can find rattlesnakes over here. It's pretty bizarre because like over on the western side of the mountains, there's not very much in the reptile department, but if you go over here, like this picture I took in Pipestone Canyon. When I was there, I saw like 4 rattlesnakes in a small stretch of land. So it's like very different from where I live. But yeah, those are the eastern slopes of the mountains. And you know, a bird that you can oftentimes find over there is the black-billed magpie. There's a lot of Native American stories about the magpie, but they are very opportunistic birds. You know, in the corvid family, very beautiful birds. Oftentimes see them flying around. They've been known to eat ticks and things off of deer and other big animals out there. So if you're in a very ticky area, you know, maybe go out and just lay out in the sun let these birds come by. No, don't do that. But yeah, that's the black-billed magpie. One of my favorite birds to see over on the eastern side is the LAZULI bunting. Now, the LAZULI bunting is a great bird that you'll find oftentimes in very shrubby areas near bodies of water. And you see that in this picture, you know, both of these birds have that like bright blue coloration. Those are both males. So in a lot of birds, males will be more brightly colored to attract females. Males will also be the ones that are singing so that they can attract females during the mating season. But so the females of this species are going to be a lot duller in coloration. But that is the LAZULI bunting. You'll occasionally find them on the western side, but they're definitely more eastern side birds. You can also find the BULLOCK'S oriole over there. Very, very beautiful bird, bright orange. And what's really cool about orioles is that oftentimes if you ever want to attract an oriole to your feeder, they will come if you put out like fruit and jelly. That's oftentimes a good way to attract orioles. Just make sure that, you know, your feeder is a bit rodent proof, because you might also have a little bit of a rodent problem if you just leave fruit out on your feeder. But yeah, very, very beautiful birds. BULLOCK'S orioles are. So, just like all living organisms, birds play very important roles in the environment. Lots of different ecological roles that these birds are playing. But I have a question for you all that you can respond to in the chat box. I'm curious about, you know, what you appreciate the most about birds, because there's a lot to appreciate about them. So we'll go in and see what people are saying. Somebody's happy that they eat spiders. Their songs, very beautiful. Keep cats entertained. Talk a little bit about cats in a second. Come from dino times. That's really cool. That's really true, actually. The closest living relatives are actually, you know, the crocodilians and the dinosaurs. Well, dinosaurs aren't living, but that's who they're actually more closely related to. So they're kind of technically reptiles, if you think about it. Sing their happy song, eating bugs just because of what they are. That's right. The variety. I'll read one more. Raptors eat rodents, finding eggs in nests. And we'll see what else people are saying. And they sing. They do sing. Social and clever, very clever. Loveliness. Get one more before we move on. What else? How they fly. Yep, they fly really quickly. You know, a lot of birds, there's a lot of different flight patterns that you can pick up on, and it can be a really good way to actually tell what birds are. You know, birds such as like woodpeckers and birds of prey have very typical flight patterns that lets you tell what they are. So yeah, as I was saying, yeah, they have very important ecological roles. And you can see that in certain examples in the birds in the park. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So one of the examples of how they're very beneficial to the ecosystem is with the Clark's nutcracker. These birds are very beautiful birds that live up in the mountains, and they're in the corvid family. So the corvid family is the crow, raven, and jay family. And what's really cool about Clark's nutcrackers is that they have a mutualistic relationship with the white bark pine. They're actually one of the most important dispersers of seeds for the white bark pine. And there's certain areas of the white bark pines range in which it's in decline. Part of that due to like, you know, a pine beetle or something like that. Um, and so in the areas in which the white bark pine is in decline, it's really, you know, important that these are around so that they're performing that important ecological role. So that's the Clark's nutcracker, they can see. The rufous hummingbird, these tiny, tiny little birds I talked about that migrate all the way down to Costa Rica and back, they've been known to pollinate at least 129 different plant species. So like that's so many plant species that these tiny little birds are pollinating. And so, yeah, I'm just thinking about like what would happen if like we didn't have these birds out here. I mean, they would lose a significant pollinator, these plants would. So rufous hummingbird. Pileated woodpeckers. So they're our largest extant or our largest living woodpecker in North America. Also a pretty common bird to see around out in the woods. What's really cool about them is they'll excavate really, really big cavities in trees that can oftentimes be used by other birds and small mammals as homes. And sometimes even mammals as big as raccoons will use those holes that they excavate. And so even though they don't intend on performing like this role for these other animals, like it's, you know, even still then, like they're creating homes that other animals can use. So yeah, it's pileated woodpecker. So currently there are 3 birds that are listed as either threatened or state sensitive that that inhabit the park. And so those birds are the northern spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, and the bald eagle. So yeah, that's right, Woody the woodpecker. That's right, that is a pileated woodpecker. So I'll talk more in depth about all of these birds in just a moment. So marbled murrelets are seabirds, which is really cool that they're actually, you know, have been documented in the park, because one thing that's really interesting is that they were one of the last birds to have their nest discovered. And scientists were kind of baffled when they actually found them, because they're like, oh, they're these birds that we've seen out at sea, but they're all the way inland. And typically they'll fly as far inland as like 45 miles inland to nest, but they have been recorded in the park boundaries before, which is pretty cool. But they, in order to nest, they require big stands of old growth forests. So old growth forests are forests that have not been cut and in which the trees have been allowed to grow to their very large size. And typically, you know, these birds prefer to nest in those trees because they have such a big size, and they take a really long time to get to that size. A lot of these trees do. And so it's really important that we preserve those forests for murrelets and for the northern spotted owls. Now, northern spotted owls were kind of, you know, we're one of the faces of the conservation movement back, you know, in the like 80s, 70s, maybe even way before I was born. But they're also very crucial. It's also very crucial to protect old growth forests for northern spotted owls, because just like the murrelets, they require large stands of old growth forests in order to reproduce and to be successful. And a lot of areas in which there's been some cutting, you know, spotted owls have been replaced by barred owls, which have now become a more common bird than the northern spotted owls have been, because they were able to replace them. Yeah, northern spotted owls were kind of like one of the mascots for saving the redwoods back in the days, and they still are very good indicator species for healthy old growth forests. So that's those 2. Now, bald eagles are still listed as state sensitive. Now, it might seem kind of bizarre to some of you if you live in Western Washington, because as you know, there's lots and lots of eagles around. And actually, the Skagit River, which runs through the park and down to and down to the Sailor Sea is actually has the highest concentration of bald eagles in the state of Washington in the wintertime. So if you want to see a bald eagle, just hang out by the river in the wintertime and you'll be sure to see lots and lots of eagles. But in the last century, their numbers were actually decimated. And part of that due to there being large uses of pesticides such as DDT that people working in agriculture would use to protect their plants. But DDT would actually cause the shells of these birds to thin out and eventually break and ultimately not be successful. So their numbers were decimated in the last century, and thanks to conservationists, their numbers have rebounded significantly, and we can see bald eagles with ease in our state now, which is pretty great. But it's still very important that we protect these birds and that we're cognizant of the pesticides and things that we're using. So I have a question I want to ask you all. You all can respond in the chat box. I want to know in what ways you all think that we can help preserve birds. So feel free to respond. Let's see what people say. Ways that you all think we can help them. Don't put dye in your hummingbird feeder. You don't need it. That's true. Cats, talk a little bit about cats. Protect habitat, save forests, absolutely. Feed them, all right. Record populations on eBird, yes. Vote for politicians. Oops, sorry, Kim, I was gonna read yours. Vote for politicians that support conservation efforts and believe in climate change, all right. Participate in bird counts. Don't destroy their habitat, absolutely, don't do that. Don't kill them, absolutely not. Have bird bath, bird food and bath. Don't feed them bad things, absolutely. We'll do a couple more. Plant bird gardens, maintain habitat. Any more responses? A couple more. Use window treatments, talk a bit about that. And plant bird-friendly flowers and plants. Don't be a murderer, absolutely. Wilderness, cool. All right, so there's a couple ways that we can help birds, and I'll talk about those. Window collisions. So close to 1 billion birds each year in the United States die from window collisions. A lot of this being, there's reflections on the windows. So sometimes birds can't really tell, that there's a window there and, if there's a reflection, or if you have one of those big fancy buildings that has the windows that are, clear that, you can see to the other side of the house. Birds will oftentimes, not notice that there's a window there and just fly straight into that window, and it can cause a lot of bird mortalities. So ways in which you can protect birds is by putting things on windows. There are bird savers that you can buy to put on windows. Here at the visitor center, I put that picture up on the screen there. We put some little bird silhouette cutouts there to help birds know that there's a window there, so that the birds won't fly into the window. There's little curtain things that you can put on your windows that help break up patterns on windows so that birds don't just fly into them. So yeah, there's things that you can do to help them not fly in the windows. We'll talk some more about that. Where can you get those bird silhouettes? I'm pretty sure. So those bird silhouettes were actually made, before I got to the park, but I'm pretty sure those were just cutouts that we, made ourselves. And we might have had kids draw on them, but I'm not 100% certain about that. But cats, so just so you know, I don't have anything against cats. I grew up with cats. I actually grew up with cats that we would let outside. However, about 2.4 billion birds die each year from cats. And so if you think about it, I mean, cats are really, really great predators. It's kind of known that unlike dogs, cats are still kind of have that wild edge to them. They can do really well outside, but they can also wreak some havoc on the local ecosystem. And so it's great to like keep your cats indoors if you can, because it'll prevent a lot of bird mortalities there. I know some people personally, one of my friends, had a bird collar for his cat. So it kind of made his cat look like a clown, but it was like a really big, brightly colored bird collar. It also had a bell on it, that he had to alert birds. So he said it was supposed to prevent bird mortality by 90%. So that's significant. But if you can, it's really great to keep your cats indoors to prevent the death of a lot of native wildlife. And yeah, and a couple other things too, being cognizant about climate change and how that might affect birds, and other environmental factors that would affect birds, like, not cutting down our old growth forests and things like that. So bird watching is something that can be done from anywhere you are. So if whether you're out here in Washington, over on the East Coast, over all the way across the world, bird watching is something that you can do from home. It's a great activity that you can do with your friends and family members. And then you might even see some of the birds I talked about in this video. So great tools to start bird watching: binoculars. Binoculars can be pretty pricey depending on the type that you have, but they don't necessarily have to be. You can start off with a cheap pair of binoculars. In fact, I would recommend that if you're just getting into birding. I just upgraded to a good pair of binoculars last year, and I had been using a pretty cheap pair of binoculars before that. Did me pretty well. Saw a lot of good birds with them. In this picture, you can see there's also a spotting scope, which can help with birds really, really far away, that you might not be able to see with binoculars themselves. And if you're can't get yourself a spotting scope or a pair of binoculars, you can get yourself a bird feeder for your house. You can see in this picture here that pileated woodpecker is on the suet feeder. Woodpeckers really love suet. There's lots of different types of bird feeders that you can get, which can attract different types of birds. It can be a great way to see birds out in the yard. And then bird watching, is great for, connecting you with the natural world. Seeing how these birds actually interact with the community is really cool. Seeing if they're feeding on your plants and helping pollinate those, or how they're interacting, with the other animals and things around you. And it can ultimately contribute to ongoing science. What certain right type of seed to attract different types of birds. It honestly depends. It depends on the type of bird that you're looking to attract. Certain types of feed that you buy they'll actually say the type of bird on there that you'd expect to see if you attracted those, if you use those types of seed. But yeah, scientists, use people's observations of bird, every day to help them assess, population trends, migration patterns and things. There's online databases that you can use, like eBird, that help, in which you can upload your bird sightings for a particular place, and that can help, create like a log for that place of bird seen. So yeah, it's great. I started bird watching, wow, it's been a while. I was about in the 8th grade, I would say, when I first started paying attention to birds. And ever since then, it's been a big learning process. There's always more stuff to learn, no matter how good you get. And yeah, it's kind of like scavenger hunting, because you never know what you're going to see. And I've always been into animals, but, birds, you're always going to see birds. Birds are very charismatic. You're always going to hear birds. And you never know what you're going to see and hear. So yeah, I hope you all have a greater interest in birds now after watching this program and hearing me talk for a little bit. Yeah, and I hope you all get into bird watching and take some pride and enjoyment out of start looking at things in the natural world. So yeah, thank you all for joining.
I love that you have been into bird watching since the 8th grade. I think that's just so cool. Okay, we have questions for you. We had a great participation level today and lots of fun exchanges. People are saying thanks. It was a great presentation. Few questions for you. Let's see, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to get the ones from the question and answer box. I researched while we were talking. You were talking, and windowalert.com has the silhouettes.
Okay.
Yeah, just so folks know. I've heard that hummingbirds' wings go in pattern 8 or 8. Is that true? What do you know about that?
It is true. They do go in a pattern 8. And geez, I'm forgetting the exact amount of times that their wings beat per second, but it's some ridiculous number of beats per second. I feel like it's like 50 or something. If you know over 100, oh wow, that's see, thank you. If you know something, like please put it in the chat box. I've forgotten how many. I wonder if it also varies by species. I think it does actually. But yeah, hummingbirds, their wings do go into pattern 8, and what's cool is that they're the only birds that can fly backwards and vertically and up and down. So that's pretty spectacular.
That is spectacular. There, have you been up to Paradise at Mount Rainier?
I have been up to Paradise. It's been a while. I haven't been to Paradise since I was an undergrad. I actually haven't been out to Mount Rainier since I was an undergrad, but it's a beautiful spot.
There's a bird, we were up there a couple weeks ago, and I've seen them there a lot, but never really tuned in. It kind of swoops and swoops and swoops. Do you know anything about that? Or and somebody asked me, they said, why is that bird doing that? I've seen them there before. I don't know anything about it. Just wondered if you.
Yeah, there's some birds that definitely have that like swooping flight pattern. Woodpeckers, when they fly, they'll flap their wings. They'll like tuck their wings, then they'll dive a little bit, flap their wings, flap a little bit, and then dive. And they'll kind of have a swooping motion when they fly. Somebody asked me, what's my favorite bird? It's kind of a hard question. I think it was my friend Kim. I will say that my spark bird was probably the California condor. I grew up, as you said, in the Bay Area, not too far from where a lot of them were released. But I was like, when I first heard about them, I was like, whoa, we have these really big, kind of grotesque but very beautiful birds that live in our state that are super endangered and the largest flying bird in North America. And then right before I started high school, I actually did this camp with the Ventana Wildlife Society. Actually helped restore their populations. And that was down in Big Sur, this camp was, and we got to track them and we got to see them. And that was definitely kind of like my spark bird. But I have a lot of favorite birds, so that's hard to say.
Keep checking that question and answer box, would you?
Yeah, let's see.
Thanks.
See what people ask. Can owls turn their head all the way because they have extra bones than we do in our neck? I think so. I'm not exactly sure how many extra bones like they have in their neck, but I think their head turning ability has to do with the bones in their neck, but I'm not sure how many extra bones they have. How has climate change impacted birds in the park? That's a great question. I'm not sure about. So my thing about climate change, the first thing that I would think about would be the birds that are living high up in elevation, and we've definitely had a lot of our glaciers and snowpack reduced over the years. And so, as I said before, there's a lot of birds that live high up in those mountains. And I'm not sure, I don't think that, like birds like rosy finches and ptarmigans and things, I don't think that their numbers have necessarily like dipped a whole lot, but I would imagine that over the years that their numbers could definitely dip. And if, the climate continues to warm, let's see.
Take one more question if you would, Chris.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What?
You,
What was
you,
that, Lori?
you go ahead. Do you have one more in the question box?
One more in the question box. Let's see. Does Chris lead bird walks at the park? So I would normally do bird programs, like bird interpreter programs, like at the park, in which we would do some bird watching. But this year, all of our operations are kind of different, and we're not doing in-person programs. So I wish this year we could, but unfortunately we can't. I see hummingbirds on cold winter days. Should I feed them nectar? So that's actually that's a good question. I've heard some people in certain parts of the country saying that you shouldn't put out nectar for hummingbirds in the winter time because, in certain parts of the country, they only have hummingbirds during certain parts of the year, like on the East Coast. I know I was in South Carolina, there's the hummingbirds there during certain parts of the year. I would think here it'd be fine. We do, like if you're in Western Washington, there's Anna's hummingbirds, which are around, all, throughout the year. And so I would imagine it'd be fine for them because, they're going to be around anyway. And so you're not necessarily messing with their migration and their feeding habits, during the winter, I wouldn't think.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat box. We really appreciate your time and your smarts and your sharing information with us. And so thank you for being with us today. And we hope to see you up at North Cascades National Park. I'd love to go on one of those hikes with you someday. I'm sure many people would.
Yes, please come up and visit the park. We'd love to have anybody. So thank y'all.
That's great. Everybody, thanks again for joining us. Over the last year, we've given $650,000 back to our national parks here in Washington State for their priority projects. In the next 2 weeks from today, September 20, we're going to be featuring a program on the melting glaciers and rivers gone wild, a science-based solution to protecting national parks with Paul Kennard. So sign up and go to our website, wnpf.org, to learn more. We're grateful for you. And Chris, we're especially grateful for you today. Thanks for giving us your time and talent, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Take care, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye.